How is everyone? Can everyone hear me? All right. Let's hope the screen stops being as blue. Any minute now. Is there like a button I need to press?
I don't know, man. It should just work. I should give you the Windows tech support answer.
All right, cool. All right, well, like Aaron had said, my name is David East. I am a developer programs engineer at Google. I work most of my time on the Firebase team, but I do spend a bit of my time helping out with Angular and Angular 2 specifically. So a lot of you are probably seeing a lot of new stuff today with Angular 2. And the thing is, learning new technologies is pretty hard. So raise your hand if you've learned a new technology. And this should be everyone. So like if you hadn't gone to a talk today or something, maybe that would be you. But learning new technologies is hard, and it's not because of the actual concepts that we're learning. A lot of times it's the words that we actually have to read. So this is a piece of real-life Java documentation, and it's great reading. I read it to my kids before bed. It's quality stuff. And I'm going to read it out loud. It's an abstract queue synchronizer provides a framework for implementing blocking locks and related synchronizers, semaphores, events that rely on first in, first out FIFO wait queues. So we're all good on what that means, right? I guess it's pretty simple. Well, I don't know about you, but when I first saw that, I was pretty confused. And a lot of the times when we're reading through documentation and reading through examples and stuff, this is what we feel like. And you shouldn't feel too bad, because most of the time it's not the concepts. If someone painted a picture for you or showed you a video of how it worked, it would be pretty simple. But it's the words that we use that can really confuse us. And it's because a lot of the words that we use in development are overloaded and nebulous, which is ironic, because if you look at the term nebulous, when I read the definition, I actually understand what it means. It's a concept or an idea that is unclear, vague, or ill-defined. But when I think of words that are nebulous, I can think of a lot of words in web development. Can anyone think of some nebulous words? There's one big one that just hits me, and with components. So we're going to be talking a bit about components today. Everyone has the components in their framework, or there's tons of different ways that we can express components. So we're going to clarify that today. And we're going to clarify that specifically for Angular 2. So we're going to talk about components, directives, and annotations. I'd like to give you the full glossary of Angular 2, but only have 30 minutes to do this today. So if you can learn all three of these, you're in really, really good shape for Angular 2. And at the end of all this, we're going to build a really simple app in ES5 to show you that you don't have to be doing TypeScript to do Angular 2. It can be done in ES5 as well. And on top of that, we're going to answer some important questions. We need to know what the difference between a component and a directive is in terms of Angular 2. We're going to see how all these concepts translate to ES5 syntax. And then we're also going to learn where we can go and learn all this Angular 2 stuff today. And this is my 6th talk on Angular 2, and I would like to always throw up this disclaimer. So Angular 2 is in developer preview, and things change every single day. This will be the 6th time I've given a talk, and I have to update the slides and syntax dramatically. So don't use Angular 2 in production today. You will change things quite a bit. So the first thing we're talking about is components. So in real life, in real life, not developer life, they are two different things. But in real life, a component is a part of an element or a larger whole. So if I'm going to build a car, I'm not going to build it all in one big piece. I'm going to build it in tiny little components. So if one component breaks, I just fix it and put it in with a working one, and then my car's working again. And our apps should work the same exact way. We shouldn't build our apps all in one big piece, so when it breaks, everything breaks. We build it in tiny pieces. And this is the whole concept behind building things in components. So what really is a component? Well, a component is just a group of HTML elements. And this is the most abstract, simple definition that you can get for components. So if we take a look at this component over here, it's just a section with some template tags for a profile. I'm just templating out the name, the age, and I have a little ng-click for saving. And I use this a lot in my application, so I'm going to have to copy and paste it over and over again, and that's not really all that great. So rather than do something like this, I would like something like this, where I have a custom element, and then I have a profile attribute, which I give it some arbitrary profile property, and then it spits out this section, because I don't want to keep doing it over and over again. So that's one part of components, but components also have to have a lot of logic to them. You saw the ng click for save, so how do I actually wire up that save? Well, in Angular 1, we're used to using controllers and stuff like that, but it really can be anything. It just has to be some type of backing to the template. So this is an object or a function. It just stores properties and other functions that the template or the view can use. So when you boil it down to it, components aren't really all that complicated. They're just made of two parts. We have a view and we have our logic. And that's really all you need to know for components. And it's not really like Angular 2 is creating something that's totally new. Components are used in pretty much every single major framework out there. With React, React is very famous for using components. So we can create an ES6 class, extend from a component, and then inside of this class, we can write all the logic we need to create this component. And then we also, inside of the render function, we can express out our view. And then this gives us our custom message, which is the hello message component, or our custom component, which is our hello message. And in Ember has components as well. I can extend from an Ember component, and then I can specify my own actions, which are my logic. I can use those actions in my template, and then with handlebar syntax, I can just specify my app profile component. And for those of you who use Knockout, this is also something similar. A Knockout component has a view model, which is our logic, and has the template, which is our view, and gives us our custom element. So that's really all it is for components. And Angular 2 components aren't any different at all. With Angular 2 components, we have, this is sort of a big old block of Angular 2 code, and I don't want you to focus too much on what's going on. But what I do want you to focus on is that we have a template and we have a class. So the template is our view, and the class is our logic. And that's all it is. I can put a property, which is a profile. I can write a function, and then I can use all that in my template. Like, don't worry about what the crazy @ signs or anything like that means. It's not a big. We'll get into that in just a little bit. So a lot of you might be thinking, okay, so like Angular 2 components look a lot like directives in Angular 1. There's like a controller to it. I got custom elements. These are the same things. And the answer is kind of. So with directives, let's focus on what a directive means in real life. A directive is like an official, authoritative instruction. So if someone gives you a directive, you best go carry it out. Like, it's super legit. And in Angular 2, a directive is a lightweight, templateless component. So how does that mean that it's an instruction? Well, an Angular 2 directive just allows you to attach custom behaviors to DOM elements. So if I can't have a template and I need to attach behavior to a DOM element, I'm instructing it something to do. So in this case of this div, where I'm providing the red attribute, well, that's a directive, and all I'm doing is instructing it to turn red. So a directive in Angular 2 is just a lightweight component. It doesn't have a template. It just can instruct current DOM elements to do specific behaviors. And the way we write them is pretty simple. We use an @directive annotation, and we'll get into annotations in just a bit, so don't worry about the @ signs. And then we have a selector, which is just a CSS selector. So I use an attribute selector of red, which lets me use the div attribute red, and then I provide my logic, which is a class. Inside of my class, I'm using a constructor. And this is a little bit of the dependency injection in Angular 2. It's really simple. All you do is provide what you want to inject in the type, and Angular is smart and will inject that for you. And so since I have the element that I'm actually putting the directive on, all I'm doing is setting the styles color to red. So all of the text inside this directive will be red. And that's really all there is to directives. So to answer the big question, what's the difference between directives and components? Well, components are just directives with views. That's it. And we can even take a look at the Angular 2 source code, and we see that a component just extends from directive. So a directive is a lightweight component, or you could say a component is a directive with a view. They just simply works out that way. So I promised you guys that I would talk about annotations. So in real life, an annotation is a note or an explanation on like a text or a diagram or something. And in development, it's something similar. We're providing a note, but we're providing this note for a compiler. And there are two types of annotations that you might come across if you're learning Angular 2. You'll see type annotations for TypeScript and metadata annotations for Angular. So they are completely different, and 99.999% of the time when someone says annotations, they're referring to metadata annotations. So when I say annotations, assume I'm saying metadata annotations, but I do want to talk about the difference between the two. So type annotations are specific to TypeScript. So this is a piece of TypeScript code, which is the superset of JavaScript, and I'm writing a function called sayHello. And what I'm doing is I'm passing in a parameter for name, but I'm giving it a type annotation of string. And all this does is it provides a note to the TypeScript compiler that says if anyone tries to put anything else but a string inside this function, I'm going to get really mad and I'm going to let you know about that. So below, where I'm calling sayHello and I'm passing a 1 in, it's getting angry at me and it's going to let me know that this isn't right, which is really useful because I would try to essentially say hello 1, and it's not really what you want. You want to be putting in a string there. But as far as annotations go in Angular 2, we call them metadata annotations. And all they really do is they tell you more information about the class. So we have our class of myComponent right here, and then at the top, we're saying @component selector CMP. And all this does is it says, Angular, this class is a component who has a CSS selector of CMP. Therefore, when I type a component or CMP custom element, it knows it's this guy right here. And the @view annotation tells Angular, hey, Angular, this class, he has a view of a template, which is just div hello, and that's it. I could provide a template URL if I want to call out to something else, or I could just provide the template in line, which I'm doing right there. So that's how that looks in TypeScript. But how many people actually use TypeScript every single day, or at least even like once a week? Is not a lot of hands. But how many people use ES5 every single day? So how many people think it would probably be pretty useful to see what an Angular 2 component looks like in ES5 so you could use it today? You don't have to raise your hand, I just assume that. So it is a lot to learn both TypeScript and Angular 2 at the same time. You're trying to learn new syntax for Angular 2 and then new syntax for TypeScript, and you're just kind of like, I don't really know what to do. This is a whole lot. And it's, I feel for you. So you might be asking, how does all this syntax work in ES5? I just want to use something in ES5 today. And it's luckily for you, there's actually an ES5 version of Angular 2. And this is a real-life CDN URL that if you went to it, it would give you a big JavaScript file, and you could start using Angular 2 in the dev preview today. And what this does is it gives us an Angular object on the window, just how we use with Angular 1 today. So we can call out to window.angular. And components are just as simple in ES5 as they are in TypeScript. And as a reminder, our components are just two things, view and logic. So to create the logic part, I can't use a class. So a class is what I use in TypeScript or ES6, and that's not available in ES5. So to use that, I use a constructor function. So I say function myComponent, and then I put in this dot whatever profile or properties or functions I need. And then any functions, though, I'll put onto the prototype of my constructor function. But how do I do the annotations? Those are the crazy @ signs. Like, how does that actually translate to code that I can write in ES5? Well, TypeScript compiles down to ES5. And when it does, we place a property onto the constructor function called annotations. And that it's important to realize that it's not a property of the object, it's not on the prototype, it's an actual property on the constructor function, which is essentially like a static property of a class. So when I say .annotations, I'll assign it to an empty array, and then to actually put in an annotation, I can say new angular.component annotation. And that is the same thing as saying @component in TypeScript. And then I can provide my selector of what the component should be. And then if I want to do the view, it's very similar with new angular.view annotation. And we have to actually write out view and the full name annotation because of some compatibility stuff with TypeScript. We just can't say component. That changed like yesterday. But, and then altogether, the way this looks is that we have our constructor function, we have our function on it, we provide our annotations, which tells us that it's a component, and this is the components template. And then down here at the bottom, I have my custom element, which is a profile card. And all we're doing right here is we're using the array brackets, which is a property binding. So it says, let's bind to the property called profile, which is all the way up there at the top, and we're going to assign it some arbitrary profile. And that's how we'll fill out the entire template itself. So some of you may think like, okay, well, I'm not ready to jump into TypeScript. I still want to write ES5, and that whole data annotations thing seems a little clunky, so I don't really know what to do about that. Well, we're thinking of you. Brian Ford on the Angular team, he has written a library called AJS, and it essentially stands for annotator. So I convinced him to open source this yesterday. So if you go to the link, and it's just Angular, github.com/angular/a, it'll take you to a little README for that. And all we're doing is we're providing the annotation-like syntax for ES5. So at the top, we're creating a component, so var my component, and then we say a.component. And you can think of that as the @ component for TypeScript. And then after I provide the selector of CMP, I can then chain onto that and call view, and then provide my template. And then I chain again, and I say for, and this is my constructor function right here. I just put in a function, and I specify my property. And then right down here at the bottom, I can create my profile card by binding to the profile property. So this reads a little bit more like TypeScript, but you can write it in ES5. So that's a lot of talk about Angular 2. So I'm actually going to do a little bit of live coding. And I'm going to build this from scratch. I have AJS, and I have the ES5 version of Angular local to my computer. And I'm going to create an index.html file. And then inside of here, let's create a little HTML snippet. We'll call this an Angular 2 sample. And the first thing that we're going to need to do is actually use Angular 2. So I have it local, but it's also at this URL right here for anyone who wants to mess around with it. I'll have it in the links afterwards. But for bandwidth purposes, I'll include it locally. So I have Angular 2, and then I'm also going to include AJS as well. So this is all very similar to how we create Angular, include modules and stuff like that. And then now I'm going to write the script for my actual app. So I haven't created that file yet, but we will. And now I'm going to just get a little ahead of myself, and I'm just going to write my component. So now we need to actually, so is that a little better, or is that, so everyone can read that? All right, cool. It's probably a little too big. So now we'll do our app.js. So we can safely assume we have Angular on the window. So what we're going to do is we're going to create a function, call it myComponent. We'll say this.name, we'll just set it to my name. And then now I'll say myComponent.prototype.save. And I'm just going to make sure I spell prototype correct. But all I'm going to do here is just log to the console saved. So we have our logic. So now we need our view. So we'll say myComponent.Annotations. We'll assign that to an empty array. And then with the first element, we'll say new Angular.Component annotation. And then within here, we'll provide our selector. And we knew we called our element CMP, or our component CMP. And now we can say new Angular view annotation. And right here, we'll provide our template. So we'll say h1, hello, double curlies for name. And then we'll break out and we'll do a button. And every time we click this button, we'll log save. So the way you do event syntax in Angular 2 is you provide parentheses, and then you would say the event name, and you would call a function. And our event name in this case is click. So at this point, we've created our component, the logic, and we've supplied the views. So to get Angular to actually put it on the page, we're going to wait for the document DOM content loaded event to fire. And then when we know everything has loaded, we'll say Angular.bootstrap, and then we'll pass through our component. So I have a little server running. So now I'll refresh, and we have an error. And that is always fun. Right here. Oh, look at that. You guys are good. You're Angular 2 experts already. Yeah, seriously, I would not have caught that. So now it says, hello, David, and I click save, and then it just saves. If I go to sources, I have my app.js right here, and it's all just regular ES5 code. But that's how you do it without AJS. So let's see how you do it with AJS. So to do it with AJS, we're going to say var, and we'll just use a different component name for now, and we'll say a.component. We'll provide it a selector of component with no space, because that's the good way to do it. And then we'll provide our template. So I'm just going to take the template from down here. And I'm actually going to comment this out, because I don't need these annotations anymore, because I'm actually providing them through a different way. So now I have my template, and then I'm going to call for. And so this is where I could provide a constructor function and do everything. But rather than do that, I have my component down here, because we've already specified a component. So it's essentially the same thing as passing through a constructor function in all the prototypes. And then down here, instead of my component, I'm going to say my CMP, because this is the annotated component. And just to prove that it's different, instead of saying name is David, I'm going to change it to Jeff, the great bearded one. And he's that one right there. So now I refresh, and now it says, hello, Jeff, the great bearded one. And then when I click save, we go to the console. We can see all the times where it's saving. So just right here, this is how you make just in about 20 lines of well-spaced out and accommodated code. This is an ES5 Angular 2 component. So if you want to know how I can make this for myself today, we will get into that. So how do I get started with Angular 2 today? This is all cool. Let's get going. Well, there's this pretty cool website called angular.io, and this website will take you through a lot of the stuff that's current in Angular 2 right now. So if you click Learn in 5 minutes on the start, we have a whole thing on getting started with TypeScript in Angular 2, and we're updating this to have an ES5 example right now. If you go to the step-by-step guide, we have 4 steps that you can go through for getting started, learning how to display data. And if you come down here, you can see there's a TypeScript as well as an ES5 example. So you can step through all these and learn all this new stuff. And we are updating this literally every single day. So always come back and check for some new content. And when you're going through all this, don't worry about the words that we're learning. As you can see, the words are nebulous. They don't always make a lot of sense. What we really want to focus on are the concepts. So if you focus on the concepts, everything will be a lot more simple, and you can learn new things, including Angular 2, a lot easier. So that's my talk. I will be in the back. If you are interested in asking me questions, you can. I also have Angular 2 laptop stickers, a limited amount, and Firebase Happy Cloud stickers. So if you want some of those, come seek me out. So thank you very much.